On the Track is a web TV show about cryptozoology, natural history, green issues and whatever else the team feel like making up as they go along. Enjoy!
What's in this episode, Mr. John?
Well, Hennis, this week we have the second part of Ronan Coghlan's description of the magical world of leprechauns, and Richard and I will be taking a collection of disparate stories from Hennis's magic box.
I really like the old credits.
So, Rossiter, what's new down at the Youth Outreach Centre in Brixton?
Oh, we're having a great old time. We're gonna be going for a nice day out at the museum.
At the museum?
Yeah, the museum.
What is that? The Natural History Museum or something?
No, a different museum.
What museum is it?
Oh, it is the Museum of Used Syringes and Asbestos and Pox.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, hello again. It's Saturday afternoon at 3, which can only mean one thing. It means it's time for another episode of On the Track. My name's John Downs, and just in case you didn't know, I'm not only the director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology, but every Wednesday evening at 6:30 for about a quarter of an hour, and every Saturday afternoon at 3 for about twice that, I bring you all a miscellany of hard science, weird shit, and what's the other thing? Rossiter, what's the other thing?
Surreality!
Oh yeah, surreality. But what is surreality, I hear you ask? Well, don't ask me. I think you should have a word with Prince Rupert of the Rhine, a 17th century heartthrob par excellence.
Well, I think that surreality is what happens when you do something which is a juxtapositioning of various different subjects in order to see the true meaning of the universe.
And that, I think, makes more sense than most of our explanations about what surreality is. But enough of all this. I want to pass you over to our first guest, who's back from last week with the second part of his explanation and investigation and exposition into leprechauns. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ronan Coghlan.
Now, I have another account here. In the year 2000, a bunch of little men with dark skins, estimated at about 2 foot tall, were observed at Halloween. Halloween in Irish folklore is the time that the gateway between this dimension and the other world is open. It was the start of the pagan Irish year before Christianity arrived. And it was generally felt that in that time, if creatures from the other world wished to come into this world, that was the time they were likely to do it. Now, I've actually got a story of a leprechaun seen in Texas, a bit far from home. But these two Americans, well, you'd expect them to be Americans in Texas, I suppose, They were outside a store from which they had emerged when they were approached by a little man dressed in normal human clothing, as it were. No strange costume, nothing like that. But he was a very strange little man. He approached them. He had a very heavy Irish accent. And he said, "It's nice to see you. How's your grandmother?" This made the husband of the couple stagger a bit. "Well, she's getting on in years now," he said, wondering if he'd ever met this little man before. She's getting on in years. "Yes, she's in a bad way at present," said the little creature facing him. "And now, your wife," who was standing next to him, "you don't need to worry about her. She's a keeper." "Oh," said the husband. "And now I'm going to give you something," said the man. And he twitched his great red eyebrows. He had red eyebrows, which, like some Irishmen, tended to cover a great part of his face. "I'm going to give you 2 cents. 2 cents to give and 2 cents to get back." Now, the husband knew about Irish folklore. If a leprechaun gave you something, you had to give him something of equal value back. So he said, "I leave the payment in my house on the table overnight." And he said goodbye to the little man, who wandered into the nearby supermarket. And he thought, could that possibly have been a leprechaun? His wife was a bit taken aback as well. The man's diminutive size, plus his knowledge of the husband's grandmother, and the general sort of feeling you had when looking at him, the aura about him, was such that he seemed otherworldly. So they went back home, and that night, your man left out another 2 cents to exchange for the leprechaun's 2 cents in a box. He and the wife went upstairs. Night fell. Darkness enshrouded everything. He came back down the stairs in the morning. The box had gone. Completely missing, vanished. Nobody had been in the house. Yet the leprechaun somehow managed to get the box because he was convinced it was a leprechaun at this stage. I don't know how the leprechaun managed to migrate to America, but you've got to remember that leprechaun is a rather specific term, and I rather think that it covers a number of different diminutive beings, but this one was definitely Irish. He had a brogue that would make Doc Shields look like an Englishman. Therefore, he concluded he had seen a leprechaun in Texas. Now, there are dozens of stories like that. The trouble with anecdotal evidence is that it's difficult to track down. You hear someone's story, you read it in a newspaper, in a magazine, in a book. You see it even on television, but very often it's hard to track down the person concerned and verify what he has said. But if there are enough anecdotes, you begin to see there's a distinct possibility that the entity, if you like, that they're talking about has a distinct possibility of existing. So therefore, when you ask, do leprechauns exist? My answer would be, one should certainly consider the possibility. Always tread carefully when you're dealing with these kind of things, but it looks as though there may be something behind it. As I say, there are quite a number of these things, and they are to be found in this elegant book on fairies, which you can purchase from Amazon and other online retailers. That's The fairy realm, a joy to read, as I've heard it said.
And the author of the fairy realm?
It is I, and none else.
No, I hadn't guessed.
Did you not intimate from the enthusiasm I was showing?
It
What it
never
was?
occurred to me, Ronan. It never occurred to me.
Well, I am feeling like doing a bit of merchandising today, so I'm just doing it with that, because you do get a lot of accounts of people who have seen diminutive beings, little people, from all over the world in that book. They're all taken down. Not all of them are reliable, of course, you don't know, but there is a cumulative result which I think indicates the possibility of their existence. It shouldn't be dismissed offhand. A lot of people dismiss fairies simply because they think they are childish imaginings. But our forebears, and by forebears I don't mean forebears, I mean our ancestors, did have a strong belief in them. And we shouldn't dismiss that belief simply because we haven't seen any, and science, as yet, has not discovered them.
I was interested in what you said about the old Irish gods becoming spirits.
Yes, I'll tell you how that happened. Christianity came in. The Christians said, well, you can't worship the old Irish gods. So the Irish poets put them into Irish history as an early race, Tuatha Dé Danann, which had magical powers. And it turned them into a fairy race. They're the ones that W.B. Yeats referred to as the trooping fairies. They were sort of depicted as glorious things, and they continued to appear in Irish legends, sagas, and in pseudo-histories that were penned by the bards themselves, so that they became, in the minds of the Irish, not gods, but a race of magicians that had existed in former times. But they are still believed in by some. They can be seen in the twilight, in liminal times.
Is this the same process that Kipling talks about at the beginning of Puckpook's Hill? About the people of the hills? That they came
Well, I think Kipling's idea was the people of the hills were former races of stunted people whom he identified with the Picts of Scotland. But this idea that they were an early human race has generally been discounted by folklorists. That doesn't mean it's wrong, but a lot of persons who have gone into the subject of fairies have come up with an idea that they are entirely mythical. You read any book by a qualified folklorist, and he is likely to say that the fairies are entirely mythical. Whether they are or not, I don't know. I mean, I do not think they are gods, but I do not discount the possibility that they were powerful beings who were revered as gods in days agone, before my time, and before my father's time, in the old days, when the English language was not spoken in Ireland, and indeed, when the Irish language was not spoken either, but strange little dialects were spoken among the Neolithic Irish. And I'll tell you something else. My daughter was very much into DNA studies and has been getting DNA profiles on the family done from America. She sends all this DNA detail, including swabs and God knows what, off to America. And according to her findings, which eventually came back, I am myself almost totally Neolithic Irish in composition. I have a small Norse element, but I'm mainly Stone Age Irish.
Now, why doesn't that surprise me, Ronan?
I have no idea. I mean, it's not as though there is anything unusual, eccentric, or anything that would make people point at me in the street. But then again, in the town in which I live, there was a town drunk. Now, a lot of towns have a town drunk, but this fellow was almost employed by the town council as the official drunk. Everybody knew him. And one day, as I was waiting for the bus, I found myself sitting next to this inebriate who started to discuss cowboy programs on American television. And then he stopped and looking at me seriously, he said, "Are you off the drink yourself yet?" I had never been on the drink, and my two children who were nearby were rather shocked to hear this. And as we got on the bus, I heard my elder daughter say to my younger one, "Do you think our daddy looks like an old drunk?" And the younger one, about 8 at the time, turned and surveyed me critically and said, "No, I think if he lived in the old days, he'd have been a wise old sage." And I took that as a compliment.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to do now is that Richard and I are going to be going through my list, which I have partly on my iPad and partly on the computer, of things that people have brought to my attention that really should go onto the show. And the first of these things, as dear old Ivan G. Sanderson would have undoubtedly called them. By the way, if you hear that noise, it's Richard, it's Richard rattling a packet of crisps. What was I saying? Yes, first of these things is a glut of peculiarly coloured squirrels which have been reported in various parts of southern Canada and the northern United States this last winter. They are almost certainly a well-known and well-attested gene of piebaldism, if that's the expression, that a gene that makes them have a piebald coloration. But what is the mechanism? Because squirrels don't live very long, do they, Richard? Only a couple of years or something.
Yeah, they live about 5 or 6 years.
Do they? As much as that?
If they don't get whacked by predators.
But they are basically rats with big tails that climb trees.
Yeah.
And they don't live much longer than any other rodent, except if you're talking capybaras and stuff, but that's getting off into a totally different rabbit hole. I want to know why and how genetically all these multicoloured squirrels, or party-coloured I believe they're called squirrels, have turned up in one specific area of North America, all at roughly the same time. Have a look. This is the first of the squirrel pictures I've got. I've got a whole string of them, and I'm only going to show you this one because they're all roughly the same. My best guess is that sometime in the past, these squirrels, which I believe are the American red squirrel, which is fairly commonly found across Canada south of the tree line, were able to produce a winter coat, a winter what do they call it, Richard? In stoats it's an ermine, but there are various other animals, aren't there, that can
yeah.
go white in the winter. Have you ever heard squirrels go white in the winter?
No, never.
But my best guess is that once upon a time this species of squirrel could put on a white winter coat to be able to hide itself and camouflage itself better against the snow, or it's trying to now, that the species itself is working its way towards having a white coat in the winter. But that's me being all 14 on you and working along the possibility that entire species have some sort of a zeitgeist controlling the way that they go and the way that they develop. But it's interesting that they were out in the middle of the winter, where at least partially they wouldn't have been seen because of the white. Squirrels don't actually hibernate, do they, Richard?
No, they have stores. They make stores of food to last them through winter, and they go and feed from these stores. They don't do true hibernation.
Would the transition to having an all-white coat like an ermine, it would be very, very good for them, wouldn't it?
It would be good camouflage, if that's what's happening.
Do you know, did originally the mutation which allows some animals to develop a white winter coat, did that come from a piebald gene and develop, or do you, like me, have absolutely no idea?
I have absolutely no idea.
By the way, I think I should report here about Richard, who is in a very fetching American red squirrel costume. Okay, he's not. He's actually wrapped in a faux fur rug and falling asleep on the sofa next to Archie. But I think these stories are interesting because they show that evolution is not something that happens bing, bing, bing. It's something that's happened gradually. And if indeed this is the beginning of a transition to a condition that the squirrels in this particular part of Canada and the northern USA will actually develop winter coats, it's very interesting to see how this progresses. But now, on to the next story. I wonder I can't remember what's next in my iPad list of clevernesses. But let's have a look. Okay, the next one. This is not really a story of any cryptozoological importance, but it's really cute. It's the story of how a kitten decided to make friends with a whole nest of swallows, and rather than going up and eating the baby swallows, he made a nest in there with him, a bit like Archie makes a nest next to Richard in the fur rug. And now we have a story from Australia which purports to be a photograph of a recent capture of an enormous saltwater crocodile. I thought I'd seen the picture before, and luckily I have Richard with me, and Richard is the author of an unpublished book on crocodiles that we're going to be putting out at some point, and he knows far more about crocodiles than I do. So I decided to ask him. So Richard, if it's not a recent photograph, what is it?
Well, it's from 2019, so it's 4 years old. This was a 5 metre, 17-foot crocodile that was captured and relocated to another area where it couldn't cause any trouble. At that size it's going to be weighing about a tonne, so it's a big crocodile, twice the weight of a polar bear, but by no means the biggest. The largest saltwater crocodile ever measured was 28 feet 4 inches from Australia, and there are unconfirmed but persistent reports of ones upwards of 30 feet, the size of a bus. So it's not a record breaker, but it's an impressive animal, quite capable of taking down a shark or a tiger. Well, not in Australia obviously, but in other parts of its range, such as Asia. It will be the top predator.
There have been reports of massive crocodiles from a marsh in the Philippines, haven't there?
Yes, that was where a few years back Lolong was caught. It's at Agusan Marsh in the Philippines. There had been reports of a large man-eating crocodile there for years, and a canoe containing 2 schoolgirls, because they had like floating communities on this parts of this marsh, and they were coming back from school in a canoe, and a fisherman saw the crocodile flip the canoe and bite one of the girls' heads off. And they caught a very large crocodile, but it was named Lolong, and they captured it with bait, and it took about 100 or so people to transport it on the back of a wagon when all trussed up, and it was taken to into captivity as an attraction at a wildlife park. But unfortunately it died a few years later. But that wasn't the real monster of Agusan Marsh. The monster of Agusan Marsh is what the locals call potol, and measuring it against the boats in the that they use in the marsh, the local people reckon it's about 29 feet long. And one guy said he saw it draw up next to a pontoon next to his house. It was apparently attracted by some chickens that he had there.
That's nice. I wonder if I should send him my autograph.
And it lay against this pontoon of his, so he could gauge how long it was, and it was 29 feet long. And at that size, 29 feet, you're talking 3 tons, which is the weight of a medium-sized meat-eating dinosaur like an Allosaurus or a Megalosaurus.
Didn't you have an encounter with a enormous crocodile in a zoo in Thailand?
Yes, that was Yai. He's still alive and still growing. When I saw him 23 years ago, he was about 6 metres, 20 feet. So whether he's got any longer now, I don't know if he's been measured recently, but he's had 23 years of growth. He's the biggest one in captivity, and he's a hybrid between a saltwater crocodile and a Siamese crocodile.
Do they continue growing then throughout their lives?
They continue growing throughout their lives, but the growth rate slows down. When they're young, they grow about a foot or so a year, and it slows down after a bit. And when they get to a certain size or a certain age, they only grow a few inches a year, depending on the quality of the food they're getting and disturbance and factors like that. But it might only be a few centimetres or a few inches a year.
And if you were to take an expedition now to catch or at least see the biggest crocodile in the world, where would it be?
That's a good question, because there are several contenders. There's Potol on Agusan Marsh. There's one along the Sepek River in New Guinea that is venerated by a local tribe there that believe it's a spirit that protects them from other crocodiles, and it's probably the big male chasing others out of his territory. But he's supposed to have lived in this lagoon for 50 years but not eaten anybody, so there must be a plentiful supply of other prey. But Gordon Buchanan, the wildlife cameraman, went looking for this one, and he saw the slide marks that he'd left when it got into the water, but he didn't see the creature itself. And that's 2 of them off the top of my head, but there are supposed to be others in mainland Australia, Borneo, places like that.
And what about Gustav? I know he's in East Africa, but isn't he supposed to be absolutely enormous?
Nobody's measured Gustav. He hasn't been seen for a few years, but he He lives in Lake Tanganyika. He's supposed to have killed at least 300 people. He's a Nile crocodile, which is officially the second biggest crocodile, but certainly the most aggressive, even more so than the saltwater crocodile. Patrice Fay estimated him, he's a French herpetologist, when he saw him, estimated him to be 20 to 21 feet long. Having seen film of him next to a hippopotamus, I'd say he was about 23 feet long. And if he's still growing, maybe he's even bigger now if he's still around.
And at that size, how old would he be?
He's supposed to be about 60. But you get different growth rates in different crocodiles. It's very odd. There is a crocodile called Henry, who was captured at the turn of the century, turn of the last century, not the turn of this century, the turn of the last century. And he is in a crocodile farm in South Africa, and he was an adult when they captured him, and he's still alive. And he's about 16 feet long. So whether being in captivity has stunted his growth, or whether he just simply never got that big, it's a bit of a mystery. But you know, he's well over 120 years old, and he's about 16 foot, whereas if he was in the wild, maybe he would have been far, far bigger. But we just don't know. It's an odd thing with crocodiles. Some individuals grow bigger than others, some populations grow bigger than others.
I've heard it said that some huge animals, for example the North Atlantic right whales, are pretty well immortal as long as nothing happens to them, as long as they don't get hit by a boat or attacked by an even larger specimen or something. Is this the same with crocodiles?
Well, most crocodiles, when we've known their age, have had a lifespan similar to human beings, 80 to 100 years. But there are ones that live longer. There was a freshwater crocodile, Australian freshwater crocodile, in Australia Zoo that Steve Irwin used to run. And he was about 135 when he died, Mr. Freshie. This Nile crocodile I've just mentioned, Henry, I think he was captured in 1908 or something like that, and he was an adult then, and he's been in captivity ever since. So he's at least 120 plus. So once again, it seems that some live longer than others, and we don't know why.
Bingo.
If you want to support us and help us make more content like these, please press like, subscribe, follow our Facebook page and check out our Patreon.
And as the ghost of Joe Strummer, who's an ever more regular visitor to my little studio, wants me to remind you, always press the notification bell, or else you won't be told when the next show's going to be. And that would be an awful pity, wouldn't it? And that, boys and girls, is the end of another show. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed putting it together. I want to say a big, big thank you to my guests this week, who have been Ronan Coghlan and Richard Freeman. And I want to say a big thank you to the people but for whom. At the moment, Graham Inglis is in America on a well-deserved holiday, and he'll be back after about 3.5 weeks. So Richard's looking after me, so I don't get into mischief while Graham's away. But I want to say a big thank you to Graham for everything that he does. And I want to thank Louis, the producer, for everything he does. And above all, I want to say thank you to Miss Karen and Miss Judy for all that they do, keeping the house and my little household above water. And so, ladies and gentlemen, assuming that you'll be here on, what's it going to be, it's Wednesday, What am I going to be talking about on Wednesday? I've got absolutely no idea whatsoever, but it'll be something featuring Richard Freeman. Or next Saturday. What am I talking about next Saturday? Well, I do know that I have a very interesting presentation from the irrepressible Ian Squibbs. But what else am I going to be talking about? I've got a lot of things in the pipeline. You're just going to have to wait and see. So, assuming that you're there to watch, and I'm there to see you, which I will be there to see you, what am I going to be doing? Oh yeah, I'll be seeing you.